Welcome to Biz Help for You with host Candy Messer. Entrepreneurs like to focus on the big picture, like profitability, success, and a smooth-running organization. But there always seems to be those little things like taxes, employee compensation, laws, regulations, and more. Now you can get the answers you need in one place. Join us today as we break it all down for you. Now, here's your host, Candy Messer.
Hello and welcome to Biz Help for You with Candy Messer. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed my last interview. And if you missed the episode and would like to listen to the show, links can be found on my YouTube and Facebook pages, as well as multiple favorite podcast platforms. And if you'd like to receive notifications on when my podcasts have been uploaded, please like and subscribe. Now, let's learn a little bit about my guest today. Ken is a former marketing agency owner. He's helped scale both small and large companies with millions in sales. Now he teaches agencies how to support clients with the strategy-first approach. So Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank y'all for having me today.
I am looking forward to our conversation. But before I get into questions on the topic, I'd love for you to share just a little bit more about yourself and how did you get into marketing and helping entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so basically right out of college, I went to school to become a pastor, actually. And so I was working for a nonprofit Christian ministry doing apologetics, arguing and debating and that sort of a thing, writing research papers, that fun stuff. And it was a very small ministry, just a couple of us. And I was the youngest one by far. And it came up at the end of one year that somebody needed to go get a job. And I said, well, look, I'm the youngest one. I can go do that. And so I applied for a bunch of jobs and I got this job at a marketing agency. And it was a large agency, 650 employees.
Oh, wow.
And I started on their sales floor, cold call sales floor, did that for more than a year. I ended up getting promoted to their marketing strategy department and then ended up running a high dollar web development and SEO department.
Nice.
And then from there, had a client offer me a year's salary to open my own business doing marketing. So I did that. Took him up on that. And, 11 years later, here we are, kind of thing.
Right. It definitely helps to have that year, where you can actually work on building your business and growing it and having that income that you can count on. Because I think that's one of the things that causes people to fail is really not even having the resources. So that's amazing that you were given that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I made that guy a lot of money to get there, too.
Right.
Like it wasn't just I'm going to donate something to you. It
right.
It was a pretty cool opportunity, and I don't know anyone else who's ever had that happen, and so I look back and I just feel very blessed that it occurred.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, I know we're going to be talking about strategy and why that's better than tactics, and some people may not even understand those terms. So before we really even get into the conversation, I would love for you to give your definition of each of those terms so our listeners will really understand what we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So strategy, I kind of like to explain it using a word picture, if that's helpful for you.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that bridge in Indiana Jones? I believe it was Temple of Doom, right? There's the crocodiles underneath. It's this like rickety old bridge, right? Rope bridge. Strategy is fundamentally the bridge. It's getting you from where you are to where you're going. That's what strategy is. Tactics are kind of the rungs along the bridge. And as you recall in that movie, what would happen is they would go across and sometimes the wooden planks would break. Right. That's very similar to how tactics work in our businesses. Is there certain things that we do where we invest money in or we think are a good idea that don't necessarily work? Right. And there's other things that are good footing to push us from one place to the next. And so fundamentally, when you think about strategy is this plan that's getting you from your current state to your ideal future state or a future state. And it's influenced or impacted by a couple of things. Most notably, the environment that you're in, right? And that's maybe the location or the business environment or economic environment or resources that you as an organization have, etc. But it's also impacted by what's at stake. Okay, and I think a lot of people don't really think about this is when you think about strategy, the most important thing for me to think about is what happens if this works and what happens if it doesn't. right? Because that's where we're really taking and doing our risk analysis within this concept of strategy. And I know that that's not a sexy concept, risk analysis, but as a business owner, we want to know, hey, if I go down this path and my bridge breaks, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
You're going to be in trouble.
Right?
Right.
Well, but that's the thing is there's
Right.
certain areas where you may not be in any trouble, right? You may be starting a new division, and you know what? The worst that's going to happen is you shut it down, and you lose a little time, you lose a little bit of money. We had an incident in one of the companies that I own where we were buying another organization, and we lost seven-figure sum in that purchase. Did it sink the company? By no means. We knew that that was a risk going into things. And so I think that's the idea here is what are those risks? What's at stake if you get it? What's at stake if you don't?
Right. Well, I guess that's a good point. I guess I was thinking when you were talking about what could happen, right? I'm thinking if the bridge falls, right? Back to your word picture, right? You could be in trouble. But it doesn't make sense. Like you're saying, you're analyzing the risk. Am I willing to put into this, something that could potentially, not have a return? But if it does have a return, it could be a great return, right? And so I think in business, we always have those challenges that, nothing is guaranteed, right? And so over time, we are going to have some failures. We're going to learn from those mistakes, or maybe they weren't even mistakes. It was just kind of the market just wasn't where it needed to be. So I think having that risk analysis, like I said, is something of importance as well as just like, what are we doing in our marketing, which comes back to those tactics. So can you give our listeners some ideas of maybe just what those tactics might be different than the strategy?
Yeah. So tactics are fundamentally the channels that you're using. And so let's start at big, broad channels, right? Sales would be a channel, and that could be inside sales or outside sales, right? That could be everything from, a cold call situation, right, to a lead gen reality where you're getting inbound calls. There's all kinds of options. Right. I would argue things like, let's think about Zappos for a second. Customer service is one of their main marketing channels, right? Where they treat people so well that that's how they leverage new buyers is by brand building and reputation, right? We could also look at like search engine marketing, right? Which by and large is like paid ads on Google or Bing or something like that. SEO, which is an interesting channel. There's other channels that are maybe less familiar to people, like engineering is marketing. One of my favorite channels. And the idea here in that channel is I'm going to build something that's so valuable that people will give me contact information that I can turn into a lead that is useful to them and useful to me, right? Also, you can look at things like PR, which is a channel, right? A big channel. There's a lot of different versions of PR, right? But there's also then unconventional PR. Think Red Bull throwing a guy out of a plane and having him dive back in, or think about, Red Bull having a guy take a balloon all the way up to outer space and parachute from outer space, right? So there's a lot of different methods and means here. Very often, I think we get really pigeonholed into thinking, well, a tactic is Facebook or it's Google or it's, this or
like
that. It's
email marketing or something.
And so yes, those are individual tactics, but I think it's far more useful for us to think in terms of channels of tactics, because the reality is when we think about using other people's platforms, which is fundamentally where social media would sit, especially organic social media, there's a lot of channels, right? Years ago, it was said that there were as many as 450 new social networks being developed every single day. And I imagine that number is continuing to increase. And so as we look at this, it's not just, Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. It's, well, where is my audience and how do I reach them? And how do I find the appropriate tool within this channel? Go after that. And so that's the idea here is tactics are nothing but the nail. Right? They're not screw. They hold things together, but they are not the end all be all. The end all be all is the strategy. It's the house. It's what's actually getting built by the organization.
Well, in the title of this episode, we're calling, the argument for strategy over tactics. So can you talk about why strategy is so much more important than the individual things that make it up?
Yeah. It was the great philosopher Mike Tyson who said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. If you were to go to standard U.S. military doctrine, they would say no plan survives contact with the enemy. And yet, if you look at the history of war, which is where strategy grew up, right? Generals make lots of plans. And it said that those plans dictate the outcome of the battle. The same, I believe, is true in business. If what you're doing is you're taking the small sum of money that you have as a small business owner, and you're listening to what I like to call Uncle Cletus, right? That guy who's saying, well, if you just invested in this, it would be fantastic. No idea. He has no idea. He may have seen it work for someone else, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And so strategy is fundamentally that which says, you know what? We've looked at all of the information that we can look at. We've measured everything that we can measure, and we know by going down this path, it will either work or not work, and here's how we know. If you don't know that, and all you say is, well, I'm going to just start dumping $25 a day into Facebook and hope that it works, the simple reality is you're setting yourself up for failure because you don't have a plan, you don't have a structure. And we know from looking at successful organizations, whether those be military organizations, whether those be large businesses or small businesses, it's the organizations that can analyze their situation, craft a plan, and then execute, and then rinse and repeat that succeed.
Right. And that's a lot of work, actually. So, what would you tell an entrepreneur who is wearing, 25 hats, probably trying to run a company, maybe on their own, maybe they have a team, but this is like one more thing that wow, this is overwhelming. I don't even know where to begin, how to come up with a strategy and how to implement it. What tips would you give?
So here's where, I don't know if you're familiar, but there's this thing called the Eisenhower matrix. Right? And I'll just describe it for the folks watching in case you're not familiar. It has 4 boxes. And in the top left, it's got this box that says urgent and important. The next box next to it is not urgent, but important. And then going down to the second row, you have urgent, but not important. And then finally, you have not urgent and not important. One of the challenges we all experience as entrepreneurs is what I like to call the tyranny of the urgent. And that there's things that have to get done right now, or we think they do, but they're not overly important things. And in doing those, we very, very often push off things that are not urgent, but very important. Strategy will never be an urgent demand on your calendar. You're never going to say, oh, if I don't have this strategy written up by XYZ, things are going to fall apart. That's just not reality. But what you will find is you descend a little bit more each day into chaos, and it's harder and harder to dig your way out. And so what I would say is, you're right. As an entrepreneur, you're wearing a lot of hats. I've worn a lot of those hats. Okay. I've probably worn all those hats that y'all have worn. The discipline and way to be successful as an entrepreneur is to figure out which hat is most important, and then which hat is next important, and asking yourself, how can we prioritize the things that may be urgent but not important less than those things that are important but not urgent? And so you're right. It does take time. It does take expertise. It does take study, right? And those things, by and large, don't come naturally to us. But what I can say is there's a lot of things that we as owners get distracted by and get our time sucked away into that really make no difference. That if you stop doing them, no one would ever know.
That's so true. So if someone now is thinking, okay, you're right. I do know I'm doing some things that I think are urgent, but they're really not important. It's taking away from my strategizing. So now I really want to set time aside, focus on creating that strategy. What tips would you give them in terms of how to create that strategy to find, and market to their target audience?
Yeah. So there's some what I would call philosophically necessary preconditions. Okay, those things that have to come first. Okay, so if you want to market to your target audience, there's something that kind of by definition has to be there, and that is you have to figure out what is your target audience,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And one of the big mistakes that a lot of small businesses make is they act like they're Bud Light, right? Interesting question. Last year, Candy, do you have a guess as to what Bud Light's annual marketing budget was?
I have no idea. Maybe
Just a
like,
guess.
I don't know, 100 million. I don't know.
You're pretty close. $150 million.
Hmm.
That's nearly 50 cents for every man, woman, and child in this country.
Hmm.
Okay. And I imagine with everything going on, that budget's going up this year.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so think about this. How many of us treat our marketing budget as if we're Bud Light because we're going to sell to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Well, call me crazy, but I don't have 50 cents for every man, woman, and child.
Right.
I don't imagine that you do either.
Mm-mm.
Right. And so what we have to say is, okay, while I could service a lot of different kinds of people, and I can help all kinds of people, let me start by asking the question, who of the people that I could serve is really the best audience? My
Mm-hmm.
most profitable, the people I enjoy working with the most, the people who maybe are easiest to work with, right? You've got to define the criteria in developing that target audience.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've developed and you understand, okay, this is who I think I want to go after, we have to do one very important thing. And that is we have to take the offer that we want to go to that market with, and we have to validate it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? One of the areas where a lot of time and money is wasted, a lot of time and money, is we come up with an offer that we know is brilliant. Right? You ever done this as a business owner? I've got this offer. It's brilliant. Everyone's going to love it. I just need to put it out there and people are going to flock to me. Put it out there. You start spending money on it and nobody comes.
Mm-hmm.
Because we missed a critical step, which is we've got to figure out and validate that offer. And so we have to go out to the marketplace and actually talk to that target audience. I know that that's a crazy thought. And say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think about it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And could this work for you? How would this work for you? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Tell me about it in your own words. And start to develop an internal language that your prospects are using.
Mm-hmm.
From there, you can now repeat their words back to them. And you know what people are very, very bemoaned to do is argue with their own words.
Right.
Right? And so
Mm-hmm.
the idea there is you now have an offer that you have validated. They say, yes, I would buy this. Yes, this would make an impact in my life. Yes, I believe it's worth this amount of money. And now we can take it to that very audience and say, hey, what you've said to us is these things.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how you can take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. So what if somebody is either maybe a new entrepreneur, so they don't really have a lot of clients they could go to and ask this question, or maybe it's something so different that their current clients wouldn't really be able to give them the feedback? How do they find those people to ask?
That is the perfect question. I will give you the $20 I promised you later for asking that one. Here's the deal. You don't go to your current clients. You need to go to complete strangers. And so here's the reality of being a business owner. You have to figure out how to find those perfect strangers.
Mm.
If your perfect audience is left-handed violinists who are professionals at one of the top 3 orchestras, well, you may not have a great market to go after. It may be too small.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so part of this validation process is you discovering, well, how difficult or easy is it for me to reach my audience? I'm a big fan of tools like LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
right? To be able to say, hey, how do I go and find that professional audience? Or if you're in real estate, you know what? If you're wanting to work a particular neighborhood, you could go knock on somebody's door. But the simple reality is validation can never occur with people you know, in my opinion. And the reason why is people that know us and like us will lie to us and tell us our ideas are great when they are not. And what we need is objective feedback from complete strangers. And so going hat in hand and asking a stranger, will you help me? I need 10, 15, 20 minutes of your time to get some feedback on this thing that I'm developing as an entrepreneur. I've found, somewhere between 1 in 8 and 1 in 10 people that you ask that question to are going to say yes. So you're going to have to face a little bit of rejection, right? But you're going to get the feedback that you need.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's important. And I think it is important to really talk about finding that ideal customer and narrowing down instead of selling to all. But that might sound counterintuitive to some people saying, well, I have a product and really anyone could use it, right? Or I'm a hairstylist, I could cut anyone's hair. I've heard that a lot where people will just say, but it's great for everyone. But like you said, trying to market, that's a whole nother thing.
Right. Well, that's the whole point here is, they're not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you cut hair, you probably can cut just about everybody's hair, right? That doesn't mean everybody's a good customer for you,
mm-hmm.
right? That does, like let's just think about it practically. Is every customer worth the same amount of money to you?
Mm-hmm. Generally, no.
Generally, no. That woman who wants to come in for a full cut, color, and style is probably worth a whole lot more than I am, who just wants a basic cut. I don't care if you wash it or not. like I can wash my own hair, right? I'm willing to pay you $12, right? She's probably willing to pay you several hundred.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which of us do you want more of?
Right.
Right. Well, I guess that depends on your business model and your plan, your strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know what? There are barber shops. We've got one here in town where you walk in on a Saturday and you may be waiting anywhere from 5 minutes to 3 hours. Right? And he's turning people through, shaving guys' heads, et cetera, et cetera. And there are other salons where you're going to have to make an appointment 6 weeks out.
Mm-hmm.
You're not waiting, but you're walking straight in. Well, which business do you want to have?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can have either one, because you've got the skill set to do either thing. Right? You can cut hair, that means you can serve either market. But the way that you reached those people and the outcome you have for working with those people is very, very different.
Right. Mm-hmm. I know there's so much around this whole topic and figuring out, especially if you haven't done this in the past. I mean, it's one thing if you've had strategy and now you're just fine tuning it, but if you're now first coming up with a strategy in the first place, right, and starting to implement it and testing and see what works. So if someone finally puts together a strategy, they're trying something and they're finding things aren't working, what do you suggest for them to figure out what the problem is, other than obviously going and finding that audience and hearing their words and things like that too? But are there other tips that you might have to help them figure it out and fine tune?
So there's one thing you've got to look at above everything else, in my opinion. Now, there are people who will disagree with me, and depending on the size of your organization, I may change my tune. But for the small entrepreneur doing less than $3 million, $5 million a year, you must know your acquisition cost to the penny. What does it cost for me to acquire a customer? Because by and large, if you know that, you're going to know, well, how much money do I make from this customer? You're going to know how valuable is each customer to me. And so if you can optimize off of acquisition cost, I can do things that are going to make it more expensive or less expensive for me to get clientele. Mm-hmm. And that fundamentally puts you in a place where you can ultimately really transform your business because you've got a North Star to guide you off of.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only number, but it is, in my opinion, probably the most critical. And I would argue, if you were to go back to the 2010 book, Data Driven Marketing by Mark Jeffrey, I think he makes that same argument. And that was the marketing book of the year more than a decade ago. So this is not a new concept. This is a well-established principle, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I know we've started to cover some information that is helpful here, and I know we're running out of time. So I want to ask, though, if you have an offer that you'd like to share with our listeners, and how can they connect with you? Because I'm sure that they have some questions and want to find out more.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to connect with y'all on LinkedIn. You can feel free to reach out to me there. I imagine that can be in the show notes down below here. Our offer is this. We wrote a book recently, my business partner David and I, called Start with Strategy. And it's really a book written for marketing agency owners who are looking to add strategy to as a part of what they're doing. And so if you went to thepreparedgroup.com/start, that would be a great place to pick that up, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or any of the other social networks where you'll find us.
Perfect. Yes, and everything that was provided to us, we will have in the show notes. So obviously reach out, find how to connect with him, especially because your name, Ken Cook, is probably a little bit, I don't know, prolific maybe. There might be a few people out there on LinkedIn. So definitely click the link.
Yep, it's pretty easy to find.
Okay, but thank you, Ken, for being a guest on my show and talking about this topic and sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And to you, the listener, thank you for tuning in today as well. I hope you found this discussion interesting and then you enjoyed the topic, the argument for strategy over tactics in your marketing. If you have any additional questions or comments, be sure to reach out to Ken at LinkedIn or any other links that he mentioned, or you can send us a message at media@abandp.com. I hope you can join me for my next interview. And remember, you can connect with me on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And my website is abandp.com. You can find my show, Biz Help for You, posted on several podcast platforms, including iTunes, Google, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And would you please share my show with those you know and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform? I'd really appreciate your support. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Biz Help for You. Please join your host, Candy Messer, again next time. Have a terrific day.